Hi, I'm Matt Kosten from Ellis & Associates Wealth Management. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our third webinar on planning strategies for volatile markets. I will be moderating today's session and William Ellis will be our presenter. This episode will be shorter than the first two episodes and we should be able to keep the length to about 15 minutes. Feel free to type any questions in the chat box during the session and we can try and address them as we go or at the end. As usual, the webinar is being recorded and we will send you a link afterwards so you can view anything you missed or to pass it along to someone who might benefit from listening. We will also post it on our website where you can view it anytime. There, you can also view our first two webinars in our content library. Our session today has four sections. The first is, what's your number and how can you get there? The second is a recap of the current market yields. The third is a closer look at the impact of inflation. And finally, in the last section, William gives his insight into making your money last and limiting the impact of inflation. Our first slide on your screens is, what is your number? William, what do you mean when we say your number?
Well, Matt, when we ask what's your number, we mean how much capital do you need to generate the income you need to live your perfect calendar, doing what you want, when you want, with who you want, living life on your terms. And we find that most people have a number in mind. 1 million used to be popular, now it's often 2 million, 5 million, or more.
And how do people come up with their numbers?
Well, often people pull their number out of the air, or they use some sort of rule of thumb. We know someone who spoke with their real estate agent, and the agent let them know that their home would someday be worth $1 million. This planted a seed, and this couple worked on getting their home ready for sale. They prepared their cottage up north for them to move up. They arranged their business so they could work remotely. They were at the age and stage in their life that living the perfect calendar for them was getting out of the city, slowing down, not stopping work completely, but putting in place a plan to slow down in the next few years. And their plan is to add a second trip every year to their calendar. And for them, since their mortgage was paid off, they're able to add $1 million to their portfolio, and their number is looked after. What I love about their story is that this couple understands that we have three things in short supply. We've got time, money, and health. They now have the money part looked after, and they're young and they have their health, and so they're arranging their calendar so as to have the time. The other thing they have is courage, the courage to make it happen, to take the road less traveled. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the future. So when we talk about what's your number or the amount of capital you need, there are really a few different numbers you need to explore in order to get to that number. First of all, you need to understand what your monthly income requirement is. And we like to divide spending into two amounts, what we call lifestyle expenses and luxury expenses. Lifestyle is what you need to live, and luxuries are for the extras that you would like to spend on. Everyone's different, of course, but what we found is that in retirement, lifestyle expenses are often lower, and that mortgages are done, a lot of other expenses are lower. You don't have to save for retirement.
Okay, so now that we know what your number means, how do we get there?
Well, we find a lot of value in talking with clients about cash flow. What cash flow will they need on a monthly basis for their lifestyle expenses and for their luxuries like travel or special purchases, which are most often annual spends? Everyone is unique. There is no one size fits all. It's fluid, it changes, it evolves. But I think there's a lot of value in gaining clarity about what cash is needed and where will it come, when is it needed. And once we're clear about that, we can start working on determining where the cash flow will come from, how to optimize the tax situation. We can begin lining up the investments to support the cash flow needs and to develop a portfolio mix that works best.
So here again is a slide we refer to time and time again, as it really gives us a clear snapshot of what is out there in the marketplace right now. William, can you quickly take us through the estimated market yields available right now?
Well, looking at this slide, I think it's safe to say that $1 million isn't what it used to be.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, I say $1 million isn't what it used to be because $1 million doesn't generate the income that it used to. Now, I'm not going to belabor this point here because we've covered it off in some detail in our first and second webinars, but I don't think that people in pre-retirement, or maybe even people in retirement, I don't think they fully realize the impact of low interest rates on their income and the amount of capital that they need as a result to fund their cash needs in retirement. $1 million isn't what it used to be, because if you invest in a 5-year GIC paying 2.4%, you're earning $24,000 a year.
Before tax.
Yes, $24,000 before tax, and that doesn't go very far.
So looking more closely at inflation, we see on our screens the current rate, the 40-year average, and 20-year average. Judging by these past numbers, where do you see inflation headed in the future?
Well, inflation is an enemy of investors and their capital. I might add that income tax, in concert with inflation, multiplies the erosive impact on capital. Currently, inflation nationally is between 1% and 2%. Now, where I shop, it feels more like more than that, but the statistics say that inflation is very modest right now. Over the last 20 years, we've enjoyed gradual price inflation averaging about 2% a year. Now, it hasn't always been like that. If we look back 40 years, the average annual increase in prices is 4.5%. So as a result, in the 70s and 80s, we experienced much more inflation, up to double-digit increases in certain years. Looking forward, our expectation is that we're right now at a low point in the inflation cycle, and as economies around the world eventually begin to recover, that inflation will go higher than it is now. Now, there's no evidence right now of this occurring, but I am concerned about the enormous government budgetary deficits and the debt levels around the world. And I worry that governments, rather than taking the hard medicine of cutting spending and increasing taxes, will alternatively inflate so as to devalue their outstanding debt and look after their debt problem that way. That would be very negative for inflation. I'm concerned for investors that are locking into 1.5% or 2% longer-term bonds or GICs and experiencing 5% inflation. If you reinvest the 2% you earn on a bond, you don't even spend it, you just reinvest it, you pay 1% in tax, and if inflation is 5%, you lose 5%. Net-net, that works out to a 4% annual loss of purchasing power. You earn 2, you pay 1, you lose 5, nets to a 4% loss in purchasing power, and that's before you've drawn on the investment to fund your lifestyle. In that scenario, if you're spending part of your capital to live, you quickly erode your capital. So I think that inflation is low right now, but going higher. And although I see no signs of inflation escalating, say up to 4 or 5%, I think the risk exists, and we need to prepare and protect ourselves.
So this slide really shows the dramatic effect that inflation can have on your purchasing power. I think it really shows the need to be outpacing inflation, or you really risk running out of money in your retirement. William, can you add to this?
Yes, this is one of my favorite slides. We know from our experience that $1 million isn't what it used to be. And this slide clearly demonstrates the erosion of purchasing power even from modest inflation over time. If inflation's relatively tame, averaging 3%, and I think that's quite reasonable, it could be higher, but very reasonable to assume that if you have $1 million in purchasing, $1 million in 30 years, you'll only be able to buy what you can buy $400,000 today. So that's a 60% loss in purchasing power over 30 years. If inflation were to bump up to 5%, we've been there before, the purchasing power of $1 million is just over $200,000 in 30 years, a loss of 80% in purchasing power.
So now that we've seen the dramatic erosion that inflation can have on our purchasing power and the risk of running out of money that it creates, how do we position ourselves and our clients to make the money last?
Well, Matt, it all starts with gaining clarity on your goals. What does your perfect calendar look like? What cash flow can you expect in retirement from pensions, business income, employment or consulting income? And after you figure those things out, what cash flow do you need from your investments to supplement this, to fund your lifestyle and luxuries? To make the investment capital last, investors need tax-efficient strategies. And they need income from their investments that grows faster than inflation. They need sufficient income as well from their investments, ideally, so that they don't need to encroach on their capital when markets are weak, or at least they don't need to redeem their capital rapidly. Well, this is a slide we've come up here with to demonstrate some of the things we've talked about here today. It's two families, Family A and Family B. Both families have a lot in common. They have the same old age security. These people are in retirement, couple. Have the same old age security, the same Canada pension plan, and the same amount of capital, in this case $2.5 million. You'll see from their old age security they both earn $12,000 a year. CPP $8,000 a year. They took early retirement. Only one was working. They have the same capital of $2.5 million. However, there's three important differences in the two, and the difference in their outcome and in their lifestyle is enormous. The first difference is the rate of return that they earn on their $2.5 million. Family A is invested in bonds earning 2%. $2.5 million at 2% is $50,000 of interest income. Family B is invested in a dividend growth portfolio. Dividends here, we're only assuming a 3.2% dividend yield, lower than the 4.5% that we experience. And we're, for argument's sake, assuming a 0.8% annual capital gain. So a total return of 4% on their dividend portfolio, extremely modest. And in that case, their $2.5 million is yielding them dividends of $80,000 a year, capital gains of $20,000. That's the first difference. Family A, 2%, Family B, 4%. Very modest returns. That's the first difference. The second difference is in tax efficiency. You'll notice the total income of Family A is $70,000. The total income of Family B is $120,000, $50,000 more, because instead of earning $50,000 in interest income, they're earning a total of $100,000 combined dividends and capital gains. $50,000 more income. The tax efficiency is indicated on the next line of the tax payable on each of these families. $4,000 in each case in this example here, because the dividends and capital gains are much more favorably taxed than the interest. You're earning twice as much, but still only paying $4,000 a year of tax. Very modest. And the net result, of course, is spending money for family A is $66,000 a year versus $116,000 a year for family B, an additional $50,000 of income per year. Those are the two differences. The first one is rate of return, 2% versus 4%, and we think we're being very conservative in our dividend capital gain using 4%, but we're trying to illustrate a point here rather than do an exact forecast map. Second point here is to demonstrate an example of tax efficiency with family B paying much less tax. And the third point, which is hidden in this slide, it's very obvious that you're $50,000 a year after tax ahead. But what is missing, what is hidden in this example is that family B, we believe, has some inflation protection. That there are $2.5 million of capital being invested in dividend capital gains has inflation protection, because our history has been that the dividends on their portfolio have grown faster than the rate of inflation over time, and that this provides family B with inflation protection.
Thanks, William. And now here's an image we worked very hard to ensure is not a conversation our clients need to have with their spouses or loved ones. William, can you give us a quick comment on this?
Yeah, there is, this is kind of a family A, family B. If you're family A, you will be just squeaking by. But by doing smart things with your taxes, by improving your cash flow, by giving yourself some inflation protection, rather than just squeaking by, I think we can manage for clients to have them live their perfect calendar.
So we will now begin to answer questions from the chat. And the first one I have here, I think we've already touched on it, William, but what is the rate of return you use for your projections?
Well, we're very conservative. We use a 4% rate of return. And that isn't meant to indicate what we expect to earn for clients, but it is meant to provide some insurance against the uncertainties we have as investors, because there are things we don't know. We don't know what inflation will be. We don't know what tax rates will be in the future. So we are very conservative, using a 4%.
And the next one I think we've also touched on as well, but maybe you can go in a little bit deeper here, is does your number include the option of diminishing the capital?
Well, again, because we don't, that depends on the individual client that we work with. Okay, so we talk about what legacy they may, or in fact some may not want to leave or may not need to leave, because we have clients that are on their own, and so they're looking after themselves. They're not necessarily looking to leave a legacy to anyone. We have that conversation as to what the client wants to do. But in our forecasts, because our clients are looking out so many years, our pre-retirement clients and our retirement clients may be looking out 30 plus years into the future with so many unknowns. We don't know what the tax rates will be in the future. We don't know what inflation will look like. We don't know what additional expenses for healthcare that our clients will need to spend because of reductions in entitlements that the governments might bring forward. Because we don't know those things, we really try, especially in the early decades of a retirement, to live off the income from the portfolio without touching the capital. But we certainly do have the option to eat into capital, but we really try to leave that to later years.
Thanks, William. Well, there's no more questions, so thank you for joining us today. And if you would like to discuss the webinar further, please feel free to contact us at 416-969-3190. Thank you, and I will now be ending the session.